Okay, if we could take a seat, that would be great, thank you. So we're doing really well with time management, so we're on time, nothing to do with me, of course. As the conference proceeds, my job gets easier and easier. We have one plenary panel now before lunch. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is introduce the panelists and ask them to come take up a comfortable seat on the stage. And then I will introduce the moderator. So, from our panelists, first of all, if I could ask Kaspars Rožkalns, the director of the Latvian Investment Agency, to come take a seat. Then also Fredis Bikovs, who does the same thing, but for the city of Riga. Then representing business, Dāvis Siksnāns from Printful, and the fresh face on the panel, my friend Roberts Grava, who has spent the last 20 years traveling the world for JP Morgan, World Bank, and so on, and has now returned briefly to Latvia to tell us how it all went. And managing this very, very distinguished panel that we have here, we have the president of the American Latvian Association, Mārtiņš. So, Mārtiņ, I'm going to hand over to you, and I will reappear with Slido questions towards the end of this hour.
Thank you, Dāvis. I first have to ask for all of your patience and consideration because I have taken to heart what we heard earlier at the opening of the forum, the recommendation of our foreign minister to not only do business but also to enjoy some pleasure in terms of the festival. So if you hear a little scratch in my voice, that means that is the result of too much singing and business. So I will ask for your patience as I try to moderate this panel. So diving in, we've heard from our political leaders about the big picture situation here in Latvia. We just had a wonderful additional panel that talks about some of the macroeconomic elements of Latvia's economy. And now I'd like to go down another layer because we all know investments are one of the key fuels of growth. And here we have four people who in one way, shape or another are responsible for attracting investment to Latvia and to Riga, who have put their own capital to work here in Latvia, but have also the opportunity to evaluate other investment opportunities outside of Latvia. And we have someone also who has traveled the world, as Dāvis said, and with a critical eye has looked at investment opportunities all over the world, and we're going to ask him to also comment on this situation here in Latvia. So to begin with our discussion, I'm going to give each of our panelists 5 minutes to kind of do their spiel and talk a little bit about their area of expertise, but hopefully advance us towards some kind of an answer to some of these questions about investments. So I'd like to begin with Mr. Kaspars Rožkalns, who's going to answer the question, why Latvia? You know, what would your investment authority say are the key incentives or reasons for investors to be looking positively towards Latvia as a place to put their capital to work? So with that, a word to Mr. Rožkalns.
Thank you very much. Right, there's going to be a slides, right? Yep, perfect. From our side, I'll go a little bit in the two type of the stories. And one part is what is very important, and as far as I don't know, in the previous panel, this also was a very important topic, that we have to talk more. So we have to talk more about the success cases and success stories, and we have to bring that more out of the Latvia. And that means that that's the part of the packaging, who we are, why we are here, what are we doing, and that's the packaging. And then, obviously, the other part of the story is what is the essence of why in a little bit numbers side. So if we start, okay, I'll point it here. Obviously, where the Latvia is heading, and Latvia is heading to become a very important player on the world stage on sustainable innovations. That means why we are doing that. We know that Latvia was less than 2 million people, is not going to be probably headquarters of mass production of the world. And we don't want that. But what we want to create an environment where startups and scale-ups can grow, test the solutions, and then bring those solutions to the world. And that is important also from the country branding perspective, because nobody outside, when we talk to the investors, they don't care about what we are doing, the Latvia is doing for ourselves. You only care if somebody is doing something good for other country. And that is why the innovation part is crucially important here. We are creating innovations and scaling that up. So obviously, what is the average Latvian, and why we are on a way to success? Obviously, the first part is connecting worlds apart, and that means that the Latvian is highly skilled labor. Yes, we're not that many of us, but obviously we speak a lot of languages, and 3 languages on average, and so on. What is very important was when we talk with the investors, they say the Latvia, because it's behind on average wealth of Western Europe, we're still on the hungry side. So the generation Z is still going to office and doing something, and therefore that is something that Western Europe is struggling, how to make the generation Z on a performance side. Then obviously they're ready for challenges. The Latvians, as we know, we can collaborate, but only when we are in some kind of the trouble, and that then we can talk to each other. Normally, each Latvian, as we can see, the first row here is mandatory. The second row is not mandatory, and it's perfectly free. And it means that we don't like to go to, if it's not mandatory, to go to the proactive communication. We are introvert. And from that side, obviously, we are doers. But when we have a great challenge ahead of us, we can stick together. And the third part is natural playground. That is creativity. That is obviously here in Sing and Dance Festival and so on. But the other part is obviously that legislation part. Let me quickly go ahead of to a couple of slides on the priority sectors. And these sectors like biomedicine, we see that why Latvia in biomedicine. We see from one side we have leading scientists in specific precision medicine. We are seeing that the IT and data infrastructure is there. And if we push the last step with the anonymized data legislation, then that is going to create a fantastic platform for startups to scale to the Europe. Because we are, as a Latvia, we are part of the EU, we are part of NATO, we're a safe environment where to invest, but we are also the platform and access to 400 million market. That is one part. Let's say we can take bioeconomy, then 54% of Latvia is covered by wood and so on, and that is again something that access to resources is quite good. Smart energy, if we look at that, then 16 gigawatt potential of offshore wind is the biggest in Baltics. Nobody has that potential because we have 500 kilometers of sandy beaches. We only know how to go to the Jūrmala and other places, but actually that access to the 500 kilometers of beaches gives us access to the offshore wind, and that creates unique opportunities. Smart materials, photonics, that's everything that electronics is doing, and you know Mikrotik is doing fantastic, and we see that the environment here for such companies to grow, it is possible, and we have a great success stories. We have a unicorn. We are seeing that the Google Analytics data is showing that by 2030 we'll have around 5 unicorns. So it means that the companies can grow in electronics and smart material solutions. And ICT sector is obviously bigger than Estonian. That's everywhere we tell that, and everybody knows that digital Estonia. But actually, Latvian ICT and export ICT is on the volume side is greater than our northern neighbors. These are, if we go from the packaging, start more into the details, then you can see that we're ranked #1 in startup-friendly country. Corporate income tax is 0, and so on and so on. And This is already a different type of the data, shows that, let's say, number 3 on renewable energy. We are currently on EU number 3 on renewable energy, and when we see that all production is going to be connected to the Green Deal and CO2, then the Latvia is already ahead of most of the European countries in that. Right. Obviously, we have a lot of incentives and different instruments that I'm not going to drill in the details here, but the major idea that we from Latvia and Fredis from Riga, what we are doing is we are trying to not to inform investors on hundreds of instruments. We're trying to solve the problem. You tell us what is the problem, and then we figure out which instrument you actually need to support, and that's like the green channel for investment. Yeah, that's my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaspars. So let's turn to Riga. Fredis, part of your role, obviously, is also to attract investments, particularly in the case of Riga. I imagine Riga also has a set of incentives and strategic priorities for the city. What are you hearing on the ground when you're talking to investors, and what are you telling them to sell them on the idea of bringing their money here?
Yes, good morning. I will briefly explain what we actually do, but before that I want to explain why we do specific things. I was actually thinking a lot what I'm going to tell today, because on one hand we have an audience of Latvian diaspora who are potentially investors themselves or have connections with the investors. So I thought, okay, this is probably a sales presentation, right? I have to sell how Riga is great and Latvia is great. On the other hand, we have a great audience of influential policymakers. So maybe this is a place where I can also deliver my message, what I believe we should do. So I decided to do the worst thing ever. If you ever had a sales coach or presentation coach, they would advise you not to, but combine those two audiences and address both of you, in a way. I think that there are two things that we focus from the agency side, because we discussed today that we have the legislation, the taxation issues, and different aspects and elements of when it comes to attracting investment, which are all very relevant. But I think we lack two items practically when it comes to attracting investment. And on the sales side, I mean, legislation-wise, already today, we are number 1 when it comes to legislation for startups, for example, right? We are on the top on different rankings when it comes to tax system. We have the best, let's say, air connectivity in the Baltics, right? There are a lot of things that we're better than our neighbors, let's say, and I can continue the list, although Latvians would typically have a list of why we're worse than our neighbors. But at the same time, something is probably missing, and I think the two things that going forward my agency is focusing on, first of all, they might sound simple, but are very hard to implement. And the first of them is focusing on actually selling ourselves. I think that what our neighbors did better than us and figure out better is telling their story to the world in a better way. During last year, from agency, we have brought to Latvia a lot of different investors or consultants, location advisors, and different companies like that. So we bring him there on tours, showcase the companies, try to, as Kaspars mentioned, find a specific solution just for them. And there was one question which always arose in the end of, almost always arose in the end of the such visits when they're impressed with what they see. They asked me, Fredis, how come we never heard of this place? How come we have never been here? For me, it's quite a clear message that we did not do a proper job when it comes to sales. I don't think that our product is necessarily bad. Our product is good. It can become better, but we need to figure out how to sell that better. That's number 1. Number 2, sorry for bringing a toxic topic again, but it's human capital. And it's toxic, obviously, because it has the part of migration, not only all other parts to it. When I talk to investors in Riga, and this might a bit be different compared to Kaspars, because Riga focuses on slightly different sectors, and it's mostly service economy, like IT, shared service centers, startups, and companies like that. Obviously, they're focused on human capital primarily. 80% of my old discussions are around whether the investor would be able to find the right talent in Riga. And when I talk to consultants, location advisors, Big Four, or companies like that, who advise the large investors on the entrance to one or another city or the country, I ask them, show me how are you evaluating them? Show me what are the factors that you look in the city. So up to 60% in service economy, up to 60% of decision of evaluation is human capital factor. So to make it completely simple, we can have the best access in the world, we can have the best legislation in the world, but primarily we need, and we have, talented people as a basis for that. So that's the two areas where we focus in Riga. From Riga perspective, we, during the last 2 years, I think, introduced various programs addressing this. One of them is relocating of highly skilled talent from other countries to Latvia. This is now a live program focused on startups primarily. So if you can't find a right person in Latvia, but you have the talent somewhere else, we're going to co-finance that. We are now working, and hopefully by September we'll launch a new program for highly skilled diaspora members. So if you want to come back to Riga and work here, we're going to incentivize financially that. I believe that will be probably the first program which actually gives money to that. We just launched, not just launched, already half a year, but we launched a portal, Work in Riga, which is as a marketing tool where we try to position city as a place for global talents to come to. And we also, this year, tripled our support on different incentive programs for startup ecosystem, incubators, accelerators, and things like that. So there are multiple programs, but my message probably to investors is that this is the place where you have the talent, and we, from the city perspective, and also hopefully hearing today the Prime Minister also from national level, will make sure that this will be the place where you will find the right people also in the future, and in combination with the product, which I believe we already have, like taxes, legislation, etc. This is going to be a great place to do business.
Thank you, Fredis. Dāvis, through your work with the Draugiem group and with Printful, I'm curious to hear your perspective, kind of man on the ground. What are, you've been a supporter of startups, both financially and as far as a space for launching ideas and developing ideas. What are maybe some of the key factors that you've seen in terms of those startups that you've supported that led them down to success here in Latvia, maybe in Riga in particular, and maybe also feel free to comment on what we've just heard from our two investment authorities. Is this what you're experiencing on the ground?
Thank you. Good to be here. Great to see such a turnout. I remember still attending this 10 years ago. We have come a long way since then, and 10 years ago, Printful was just started. Like, I was one person in the audience, and we just launched Printful, and by now it is a unicorn. To kind of reflect on our experience in Draugiem Group, we've been around for 19 years, and we tried 100 business ideas, and only since last year we're also investing in other businesses, and we have made so far one investment. We're looking to do more. I think what helped us and is helping other companies from this as well, we have sort of a scrappiness that we try to find product market fit faster in companies in Latvia. So companies are charging money sooner than our foreign counterparts. We're making profitable companies, I think, faster than in other markets, and especially in these markets, what investors are looking at, they are looking at profitability, perhaps sooner than in a lower interest rate environment that we saw before. For example, all Draugiem Group companies have been very profitable from very soon. Initially, of course, you cannot do it in initial years, but very soon we became profitable. So that's one thing that I think we do really well in Latvia. Another thing is that our local market is small, that we go abroad sooner than other companies. Like if a company starts in Germany, they often stay for too long in Germany. They become a local success stories, but they often are not that well known outside of their home market. All the big companies who have ambitions here to go global have to go global from day one. We started Printful in the United States. We tackled the United States market first before we actually entered Europe 4 years later. And another factor that helped us and has been a topic here a lot is immigration and foreign talent. We at Printful, started in the United States, but that was mostly initial production team on the printing side, while most of the value-added talent was in Riga. But from an early days, we used diaspora talent to help us form the basis and foundation of our marketing team. On our marketing team, which is about selling us, we had Canadian, American, and Australian Latvians as founding members on the team. Because what I saw then and what I see still right now, there's a lot of companies in Latvia who make a great product, but they overlook the marketing part of it. They lack, sometimes they don't bring in, native speakers to work on their marketing copy, for instance. I remember we had an Australian Latvian who relocated to Latvia, and he was a founding member of our video marketing team, and I asked him to speak with an American accent, given that was our target market for our videos. And that gave us, a really good credibility when we were, converting customers to the United States, for instance. So, I encourage more companies to use that. We use that a lot, and I was able to do that because I just spent, again, on a scholarship in the United States, and I just networked with some of American Latvians there, and I think that Ziesmasvētki was around the same time, right? I met a lot of people in Ziesmasvētki. I remember I met that Australian Latvian during Ziesmasvētki at Vecrīga at some beer drinking event or something like that, and I invited him to work in Printful, and he was a great addition to the team. Another factor is also us, founders of the companies going abroad, right? One of the founders of Printful, Lauris, relocated and lived in the United States for 10 years. And without that, I don't think we would have built a business of that size. I met some companies here, and they are often reluctant to relocate abroad to build a factory or establish an office abroad for an amount of time. So, that is something I think it's necessary. You cannot build a big business with factory being just in Latvia often, right? I met just one founder, they just didn't want to reestablish their factory closer to market, like in Germany and Spain, while keeping the factory in Latvia still. So that's necessary as well. And to finish on that, there's a lot of trying and failing. Again, to repeat, we had 100 business ideas that we tried over 19 years. Without that, we wouldn't be able to have the success we had. Printful was not my first business I worked on, nor it was the group's first business. I think it was my fifth or sixth idea that we worked on. So we need to still continue to encourage that it's okay to try and fail. And maybe to top onto that, another aspect is, investment that is necessary here, and we talked a lot about investors. And for that, I think we need to continue to develop local investment community, and for that we need more exits from companies selling here to larger buyers abroad, going public, capital market development, etc. Because once people leave these scale-ups, right, like Printful and others, their talent is becoming more available, and I would look forward for them to starting their own companies, but they still need investment into their companies. And for that investment to happen, we need exits, so the local investment actually being in the hands of people who can invest into their own companies, or perhaps if they exited themselves, can just form a starting capital for their company.
Thank you, Dāvis. Robert, as we just heard from Dāvis, one of the components of his success was that kind of global perspective. You, as someone who has worked all over the world for various large institutions, have spent much of your career encouraging institutions in emerging markets to invest in developed economies as a diversifier from local volatility. Does Latvia show up on those lists? We just heard from Professor Hansen about that deep integration, and in many respects, we're ahead of some of the largest economies here in Europe. Is Latvia on your list of recommended places to invest? Why or why not?
Thanks, Mārtiņš, and thank you for the organizers of this event for daring to invite me, someone who doesn't actually bring capital to Latvia, or at least hasn't done so in the past 18 or 20 years or so. What I have done is worked with government institutions literally across the world. I've been to 98 countries, and I've worked in 91 of them, dealing with official institution investors there. And I basically live in a public markets listed space, right, which is a bit adjacent to what it is that we're actually talking here. So in that context, if you ask me, is Latvia on the map for a generic investor trying to deploy their global assets intelligently throughout the world? And the answer is no, not at all. And that shouldn't be surprising. Latvia is a very small country. 1.8 million people is less than the amount of commuters going into Manhattan every day, which I remember as to give me some perspective when I first started working in Latvia in the central bank a long time ago. So the consequences of that, and we heard the finance minister discussing the underdeveloped capital markets, and you just mentioned that as well. That is a barrier to persistent institutional capital flows to a country, right? So the way it works is if you have a large enough stock market or a company that's listed in its size, it gets added to global investment benchmarks, and institutional investors who manage trillions and trillions of dollars over the world need to buy this stuff to maintain their exposures and keep their portfolios in balance. The truth, I don't think it's a sad truth, but the truth is that, you know, Latvia's equities and bonds are in some of these indices, but they're in such small amounts that any investor can reasonably and rationally ignore the country entirely and just focus on more concentrated bets. Now, that, first of all, is an opportunity to grow the capital markets, and that can help facilitate those sorts of flows into the country. But while that hasn't happened, I'd argue that this less than developed capital market is a blessing in disguise, to the extent that you do not have these flows that can be very fickle and disruptive and can leave countries at the time very quickly when you don't want them to. That's not really a problem that Latvia has. And then actually the people that focus on, you know, small, medium enterprises and startups and everything actually have, if you can get to a good investing environment underneath, a wonderful opportunity to go about their business without the threat of global macro trends influencing and infecting some of the things that are happening in Latvia. So with that said, we've heard a lot of good stories today from our politicians and from some of our, from the investment community. And from a neutral investor on the side perspective, I think there are quite a lot of good things that Latvia has. I think the Prime Minister's message that this is a stable but not stagnant economy is a very important one to do, in the sense that Latvia is not a mature country play, right? There's still quite a lot to happen. There's still quite a lot to get invested in at, if not necessarily the ground floor, but get investing in an economy that is making forward progress and continues to make forward progress. And to the extent that we've been asked by our politicians today for the people working abroad outside of Latvia to be ambassadors of Latvia and its brand, I do try to do that. You know, the further, as I mentioned, away you get from Europe, it's not a question of is Latvia, you know, reasonably a competitive investment environment versus the Baltics or versus Eastern Europe. It's what is Latvia, where is Latvia? So I have a nice little elevator pitch of lovely pictures, not least at the Song Festival, which is an amazing thing and a great hook to get people interested here. And that at least fosters the discussion. And, you know, I've recently moved to London, and I'll look forward to working with the representatives of LIAA and you know, other the trade representatives in London to any extent we can move that sort of thing forward.
Thank you, Robert. We've actually heard now a few times today, both here and earlier in the conversations, about the lack of availability of capital. And I want to maybe dig into that a little further. Maybe this is a question for Kaspars and Fredis. In your discussions with potential investors, how often does this come up in terms of the local market or the regional market? And do your agencies offer anything or play a role in perhaps lining up financing for potential investments?
Yeah, from investor perspective, if we look at the greenfield, brownfield investments, that the most investors that we are seeing from foreign, obviously FDI, then they mostly look at that they are going to get the financing from the other country. Therefore, they're not looking at how to co-finance their projects from Latvia, because the cost of the capital is quite high, and that for the blue chip international investor who is creating like whatever production or service organization here, makes no sense to actually go for a deep loans here. From other side, what we are seeing, the investors are obviously very interested in any kind of the financial aid or incentive as a part of the state aid or a grant. It means that obviously, because even if they can get, we can speak bluntly, even if they can get money cheap, otherwise that even the cheap money is not for free. So if the government incentivizes, let's say, these 5 specific sectors that I mentioned, that obviously that creates some interest. If we look from the more maybe global perspective, the problem of the Latvia here is the incentive size on comparing to size of the economy is a little bit complicated. We saw that just a couple of weeks ago there was an announcement that in Poland is going to be a microchip factory for tens of billions of euros, and obviously 1/3 of that is going to be covered by the government. So if we look at our debt and say, hey, we need to co-finance 3.5 billion euros, it's not going to be a success story. Therefore, the size of the investment is again something that we have to look very reasonable, and I would say something around I don't know, 10 million up to 1 billion is something that we can understand, and we can incentivize, and we can get the human capital, or and that is one part. Another part, obviously, is what I mentioned is the sandboxes. So the regulation part, because that Latvia is young and hungry, we can move faster on the regulation than, let's say, Poland, because to do anything in Poland, it takes forever to change in legislation-wise. For us, this is obviously because each Latvian is connected to each other through the Ziemassvētki, but realistically, through 2 handshakes, it means that you can get to the decision makers on the policy-making side very fast, and that is the combination of reasonable size of investment and with the legislation part.
So what I hear you saying is, bring your own money, but we'll make it easier for you to put that money to work.
Yeah, exactly, because time is money, and even if in Poland you'll need whatever 5 years to create that, but you can do the smaller scale. But in 3 years in Latvia, those 2 years is a cost of capital.
Freddy, commentary on availability of capital as a stumbling block, perhaps?
Speaking from city perspective, city budget consists of 2 taxes. It's real estate tax and personal income tax. So what we focus on always is not necessarily just the FDI as such, but creating as much jobs as possible and high-paying jobs. So we mostly work with IT and shared service centers and this kind of companies where there is no question of needed capital. They're financing themselves otherwise and so on. But on the projects, which Kaspars probably mentioned in a way, in manufacturing, yes, that's obviously a question where the government is ready to invest and in any way grants form or any other form give the money. And this is something that I don't know, at least my experience for the first time going through this process, I think other countries are a bit easier and faster into this. We need to kind of, I would say, find a way to find individual solutions for such investments. But as Kaspars said, we cannot probably compete on the level of giving, a 3 billion grant to large-scale investments.
Thank you. Now I want to take a look maybe at a couple of buzzwords that I often hear in the context of Riga and Latvia and the investment environment here. One of them is digital transformation. Dāvis, earlier we talked about Latvia's incredible internet speed and people can work from anywhere on the planet, et cetera, et cetera. Is that enough? Are there other things happening here on the technology front that are helping to position Riga and Latvia in general as a place to base my technology company?
It goes back to, again, the talent and immigration, but I mean, I'm a bit skeptical what cities can do to actually attract those companies. I think founders are the ones that make the companies, not cities or legislation. So if we will have more founders, that's going to actually be the most important thing and will help the local economy. On a city infrastructure side of things, I think, yes, digital infrastructure or internet is great, but again, it's not enough. Like, it's how you use the internet and who uses it to access the global markets. But what governments often can do is form these hubs. I mean, we recently saw that in, there's, I believe, Tech City or Tech City or something like that was called in Vilnius, which is going to be helped by the Lithuanian unicorn founders from Vinted, and there's Technopolis in Tallinn. Those are great, which is a city built right next door to Tallinn Airport. I think those are some good initiatives, because then if the companies are here, it's a good access to office space. But I think it's important to combine that office space with residential living buildings plus healthcare infrastructure. So what I heard that Technopolis in Tallinn is doing right. So there's office space, there's residential to live, and there's also like foreign-speaking family doctors. So like then it becomes an easier sell for somebody from abroad to move to Riga or Tallinn or Vilnius, which our scale-ups and unicorns in this region absolutely need. And nobody's going to move without those infrastructure things in place. What helps them move is our lower taxes comparatively to United States or any Western Europe country. But we need sort of a small tech city. I think that may be something that the government can do.
Well, but if I understand you correctly, in your observations, it's typically the private sector that's developing these hubs. Did I understand you correctly?
In cooperation with governments. Governments, find a space, give tax incentives, but yeah, it's the private real estate developers are developing it. However, they're also raising money. Then it goes, like for instance, I was recently in Technopolis, which is private in Tallinn. They're raising money as a bonds, right? So that's again, and there's like if we had a case like that, I think there's a lot of local investors who might be interested in that. Because as mentioned previously, what Asher Adens mentioned is that there's 10 to 11 billion of cash sitting in bank accounts of Latvian households. And we need to educate them and give them easier opportunities to invest. And that is both shares on public stock exchanges, listing public companies, but also issuing bonds for these type of projects so people can become a part of that and make money in the process.
Thank you, Dāvis. And perhaps this is an opportunity in the future for our two investment agencies to cooperate as far as with that private sector in developing some of these hubs or techopolis, if I heard the term correctly. Robert, I saw you nodding your head there. Is there some agreement there on this direction?
No, I agree with quite a lot that was just said right now. The first comment I'd make is not to underestimate or take for granted the infrastructure that's already in place, right? So the fast internet and everything. I mean, I moved to the UK 3 years ago. I would have thought, and I've lived in the UK before, but I would have thought that by now this would be a real developed market to the extent of having fast, internet access, which we take as almost a basic human right these days. But, I live in a newly built flat. For some reason, they've never been able to or didn't want to pull in any fiber. I have fast 5G internet, but it's so flaky that, every glitchy Zoom call I have, I need to reset the router or everything, right? And then that's just the UK. The further afield you get, I was in Palau last week. They don't have phone roaming agreements with anybody, so I was totally in the black. And I was speaking at an investment conference, actually for Southern Pacific nations, and there was no Wi-Fi in the conference center, so I felt entirely out of like a fish out of water. And then stable electricity. My firm was just acquired by a larger financial conglomerate that happens to be headquartered in South Africa. And I was visiting the headquarters a couple of weeks ago, and their electricity utility is a national company, apparently quite corrupt, and cannot provide enough electricity to the country to the extent that there are things called load shedding, which is throughout the day there will just be no electricity to the entire region for 3 or 4 hours at a time. So with that said, Latvia is extremely well positioned in all of that, and it's a question of doing the sales pitch of raising the visibility. So I mean, Latvia is not a unique investment opportunity that's under appreciated with spectacular valuations, but it is a compelling place to invest money. It has a good investment, an operating environment. It appears to have a supportive government in place right now. So the question is really more of marketing and visibility.
We come back to one of Fredis' comments about how we have to learn to sell ourselves better. Hopefully, with the aid of informal ambassadors such as yourself and more formal ambassadors, we can get that story across. Kaspars, did you want to comment on something?
Yeah, this is exactly why we're here today, because I would say you all here in the audience are, and here comes my sales pitch, are the best sellers of Latvia. And from our side, we don't have the money to buy all the international media around the world. Therefore, the stories that we can tell on why Latvia and on biomedicine or bioeconomy or smart energy or ICT or shared service centers, etc. On each we have this value proposition. That the problem is we need to bring the story, and this is where you all come into the picture of part of the Mission Latvia. So we're super happy that you're here. We hope that you're behind those doors are going to register for the news and get those stories. And when because Latvians, we always want to have data behind that. We need to have a data, etc. So we will package you all with a lot of data, with a lot of interesting presentations and stories and videos and so on, where to show and bring. And obviously, this is how we can reach the international community, because diaspora is something that we haven't used on collaboration with because always when we meet somebody, we get the feeling, hey, what can we do for Latvia? How can we help? And now we know where we are heading. We know those great success stories. We just need to distribute them. And then yes, Latvia is not going to be super unique with something, but we're a great place to invest. We just need to have that knowledge to bring to the world.
So the instructions are clear. We've got a room now of potential ambassadors to sell the story. We just need to do it louder and more often.
And this is actually a very good point, because what I've noticed with some other country investment agencies and city investment agencies do when they go to conferences, when they obviously sponsor the conference, they have the place on the panel discussion, or they have the ability to tell their sales pitch, they don't send people like us to do that. Instead, they agree with someone from the community, with business leaders who actually do business in respective countries.
Like this gentleman sitting to your left.
Exactly. And they do the sales pitch, and it works so much better because obviously people know that we're here to sell. So I'm just thanks for everyone who is already doing that and helping us on kind of a CSR project aside of its business, but that works.
Thank you. So in the time that we have left, I hope we can get to at least a couple of questions, and I know Dāvis has been studiously reading them. So
studiously, yes. I mean, there are a couple of trends about the questions, and basically there is a demand for more concrete comments. So Dāvis had this excellent comment about the tech city, for example, which is a concrete thing the government could do. And so are there any practical suggestions about, somebody used the phrase secret sauce. I'm not sure, it's a very American thing to say, isn't it? I think I roughly understand what that means, but what's the secret sauce to grow more unicorns, or as Dāvis said, how can we have more founders? Are there things that we can do with our laws as regards gender equality, LGBTQ rights? Is tax policy somewhere important? Do we need to build stuff, right? Not just Tech City, but other stuff. So what could we do in concrete terms? I think that would be the question.
So let's try to keep our answers compact so we can get to other questions as well. But maybe, Fredis, you want to try to tackle that, because you had mentioned human capital, for example, and a couple other items. What do you think is the secret sauce?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a big secret, but I agree to Dāvis, if I understood him correctly, that we, as a city and as a government, we probably shouldn't, we're not the owners, we shouldn't create the companies, or we should create the environment for the people and support in that sense. So as I said in the start, this year, Riga has tripled the financing to startup ecosystem, which is still not a big money, but it's a good progress. And it's mostly focused on 3 areas. One of them is support for growth. So basically, we are co-financing different accelerators and incubators, which help companies with local owners to grow. Second part is, as I mentioned, the human capital. So if you need talent to bring it from somewhere else and you need some co-financing and help financial in that, we're going to help with that. And third, supporting the ecosystem as such. And one big project, which is, we have the money for that, but I'm a bit in a legal hell right now how to do that. Because he knows it's not in public sector, it's not enough just to find the money, it's also how you're going to implement that. But we allocated also money for so-called startup house, which has been in the air for many, many years.
Yes, great, thank you. So I'm in total agreement that we need more practical guidelines, what we can do. Hopefully, I think later on in the day, we're going to be drilling down further into some of these topics, and our responsibility as conference organizers, and maybe my pledge to you, is that we'll also try to maybe prepare a summary and some key takeaways. What are some of those practical things that all of us as these new ambassadors then can maybe perhaps help implement or advocate for? Dāvis, do we have time for another question?
Yeah, there is a question about, this is a tricky one, but I mean, how do we find a balance between being open to investors, giving them a green lane to talk to politicians, think about laws and so on, and ensuring that it doesn't go over a little bit too much into, let's say, heavy lobbying for specific sectors? So how do we balance the need to attract investment with having maintaining the integrity of the rule of law? Right,
and I think we also heard an admonishment earlier from Niels about the white-collar crime, and that we need to be careful that this ugly specter doesn't present itself. So somebody on our panel want to try to tackle that? How do we balance the lobbying with the access?
Yeah, I would say from the government perspective, this means this ultimate target or the mission comes into the picture. What is the end goal? What do we want to achieve? And then if we can align the society that the end goal is we want Latvia to be, let's say, the green, great and vibrant place where everybody we want to live with the great, let's say, healthcare and expectancy of life is something that is the end goal, then and you can align also the businesses to that, then it's easier. I recently was in Israel, and they obviously is one of the most creative nations in the world. And the problem there, they don't implement the startups. They don't implement any ideas in Israel. They scale it, they test it, and then they never implement it. Why? We say because on Israel perspective, they say we don't know what's going to happen in 100 years. So that's why everybody goes from Israel to US, because that's a big market. We tested, we tried it. Yes, there's a lot of talent, but we didn't implement. And that should be in Latvia different. We should implement those innovations. We should here create the environment that everybody wants to live here in Latvia. And that is different. And if you can align the mindset with the investors and companies and with society, that the end game that everybody of us, we want to meet our grandkids and make that's let's say that would be a standard, not exception, and was still enough let's say juice in our petrol tanks when we meet that, then this is something that that every CEO can understand. That's the same mindset. They also want to do that.
Thank you for that. With the minute that we have left, I'm going to ask each one of you in a sentence or two to complete this thought. We're looking down the road now. It's 5-10 years in the future. Latvia has become the hot place to put your money. You are now the CEO of the next Latvian unicorn, and you are answering the question, I put my money in Latvia 5 to 10 years from now because of these things. What was it about Latvia that allowed your unicorn to succeed 10 years from now? What have we done? Dāvis, you can go first.
I mean, to quickly comment on that, I think 10 years ago we established our company in the United States to access the market and many other things. But in 2018, for instance, after the reform, we reestablished some of these companies who were completely digital back in Latvia. And one of the reasons was just how easy it is to interface with the government and taxes. I think that is one of the things that for very obvious reason. We are an OECD list #2. Estonia is #1. And I heard many times that in startups right now, there's like investor from Poland will ask a company from Romania to re-register in Estonia because of how easy it is to do business in Estonia and taxes. And Estonia have this, again, better marketing, but our tax system is very on par,
Okay,
very close.
Interfacing with the government. 2 sentences, Robert, quick.
Sure, I'll found a successful firm here because I want to, and I want to continue living in Riga and Latvia. We've
Okay, the Patriot, I got it. Fredis.
I think business-wise, there is a good mix in terms of accessibility to talent, tax, and legislation, but also it's a great place to have good quality of life.
Quality of life. Okay, Kaspars, closing remark.
Fantastic.
Why did your unicorn succeed 10 years from now?
The unicorns succeeded because I knew at this day and this moment that we'll be able in a couple of months to fix the human capital problem with a short-term, mid-term, and long-term solution, because that's the only break where we see if we can fix that, then the scale is the only problem. And I know we're going to fix it.
Wonderful. Thank you to my 4 panelists. Thank you to all of you for your attention. And next.
Okay, so just before we go, I get to fulfill a lifetime's dream by being an air steward and directing you in this direction. So the lunch is, as I said, at the far end of the library building. So I think just follow your natural instincts and go that way. Lunch is 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then please join us downstairs for the breakout rooms at 1:15. So see you then.